Welcome back, everybody. And I do want to invite you, if you're new to the program, or even if you're not, to take a look at mainstreetvegan.net. We've got lots going on there, including the show notes for this program, where you can find out all sorts of places online and on social media to find our guests. But in addition, there's all the information about Main Street Vegan Academy. We have 550 graduates who are certified vegan lifestyle coaches and educators, and they are practicing in 32 countries on every continent except Antarctica. So we're now on Zoom, making it super easy. But I have been hearing from people, it's still tough. The pandemic is still kind of financially happening for me. I would love to be a certified vegan lifestyle coach, but it's hard. So I would like to give you a discount code, 20% off tuition, kindness 20 with a capital K, when you go to mainstreetvegan.net/academy. I hope you can join us for our next class, all weekends, 7 days in January and February coming up. Would be wonderful to have you as part of the family. Well, I'm going to introduce you now to somebody who needs no introduction and who is absolutely part of the family. In fact, he has been called the godfather of veganism, and that is Moby. He's a musician, entrepreneur, activist, and philanthropist. His album Play sold more than 10 million copies worldwide, and he's released 14 solo albums in total. A serial side hustler, Moby opened the vegan restaurant Teeny, which I always thought was maybe TNY. I'll ask you about that, in New York City in 2002, and has since opened Little Pine, a unique contemporary vegan restaurant in the Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles. That's an award-winning and amazing restaurant, and it is the inspiration for this gorgeous and beautiful book. If anybody's watching and can see this on YouTube, I know most people are listening to a podcast, but it's a gorgeous book cover and I can't help myself but show it. It's called The Little Pine Cookbook, Modern Plant-Based Comfort. Welcome, Moby.
Hi, I should say one thing off the bat. I don't actually own Little Pine anymore.
Okay.
When the pandemic started, I realized that I wanted to have a slightly simpler life and a life more dedicated to animal rights activism. And so even though I ran Little Pine as an offshoot of my activism, but I sold it about a year ago. So I guess it's a little bit confusing because the cookbook is the product of Little Pine when I owned it, but I no longer own Little Pine.
That still works. It's still there, correct?
It's still there, yeah. And the guys who are running it, they seem to know what they're doing. So it's still there and it seems to be doing well.
That's great. And then the rest of us all over the country and the world can enjoy the recipes when we're not in LA. So just give us a little bit of history. I know you went vegan in 1987, so we're about the same vintage. What caused that to happen for you?
Well, like most people, I grew up with what I think of as the big paradox. You know, when I was very young, I was surrounded by rescued animals, and I loved the rescued animals who were in our home. We had rescued lab rats, rescued mice, rescued dogs, rescued cats, rescued guinea pigs, rescued gerbils, hamsters. We just had this menagerie of rescued animals, and I loved all of them. But I was also a suburban boy, and I loved Burger King, and I loved pepperoni pizza, and I loved hamburgers. And up until the time I was around 19 years old, I wasn't aware that it was egregiously inconsistent to love animals and also eat them. And then when I was 19, I was playing with a rescued cat that we had named Tucker, and a little switch got thrown in my brain. And I realized I would never do anything to hurt Tucker. And I knew that Tucker the cat had this amazingly rich emotional life. And so I realized in an instant that every animal has an amazingly rich life, and that I couldn't be involved in anything that would cause harm or rob an individual of their life. And so that was 1984, and I went vegetarian in 84. And then a few years later, in 1987, went vegan.
That's so cool. And it was a little bit hard back then to get information. I got mine from the American Vegan Society. Where did you find yours?
For me, most of the information I found was at health food stores. Like, the health food stores I went to, they would all have a book rack. And that's where I found, Peter Singer's Animal Liberation, where I found John Robbins' Diet for a New America, the Laurel Kitchen Cookbook, the Moosewood Cookbook. So honestly, health food stores were sort of my information portal back then. I would go to the library as well. But so much of it, so much of my indoctrination came from health food stores.
Yeah, I kind of miss those health food stores. Every now and then I'll see a little one here in Manhattan and I'll go in. It's kind of for old time's sake. So that's all very cool. So I know that you say in the introduction to the Little Pine Cookbook that after you closed your New York City restaurant, and in Teeny or TNY?
We called it Teeny, but
Okay.
whatever people wanted to call it was fine.
Well, I loved it. I love the afternoon tea in particular, and those memories continue. But you said after that you were never going to open another restaurant. So what inspired you to do it one more time?
Well, part of it was hubris, but the other part was the desire to have a very sort of well-rounded, what I think of as an activist portfolio. Like there's so many ways to advance animal rights and vegan activism. There's the traditional way of giving money to charity, 501c3 organizations. There's also giving money to political candidates and political organizations, 501c4s. There's supporting animal rights and vegan media, whether that's films, books, products, etc. But then a huge part of it, and it's very self-explanatory, is food. Food is such a huge part of vegan activism. And so I opened Little Pine as a way of sort of promoting veganism through attraction, through a great wine list, beautiful interior design, a great menu. And I was, of course, a little bit sad when I sold it, but I also am thrilled to no longer own a restaurant, because owning a restaurant can be a very effective form of activism, but it's also one of the most difficult undertakings anyone can undertake.
Well, especially during a pandemic, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, my goal with Little Pine, as I said, was to represent vegan food and make it incredibly appealing. And if it ever generated money, the money would go to animal rights organizations. But then I found myself losing quite a lot of money, like when the pandemic was kicking in, and I realized this was of no benefit to animals. This was of no benefit to animal rights, and so that's why I sold the restaurant, is so I could, I guess, focus my attention elsewhere.
That makes sense. I think sometimes it's hard to say the time for something is up, or my time with something is up, and it can go on brilliantly with somebody else. So good for you for knowing when the time was right. So on the cookbook, Modern Plant-Based Comfort, do you think that what still scares a lot of people away from veganism is they think that it means no comfort?
Well, when you and I first went vegan, veganism meant health food. And I love healthy vegan food. I mean, like the restaurant I used to go to whenever I could afford it in New York was Angelica's Kitchen. Like that was my home away from home. And, for the longest time, vegan food was whole grains and whole beans and organic vegetables. And it was great, but most people don't eat that way. And there was, up until I'd say the mid 90s, really, people had this assumption that if you were vegan, you had to eat lentils and oats. Keeping in mind, I love lentils and oats, but at some point in the 90s, people realized that vegan food could be indulgent. It could be high-end indulgent, like, former Candle 79 or Blossom, or it can be we'll call it like more pedestrian indulgent, like Chloe's or Monty's Good Burger. And that was a huge sea change, you know, where you could get people going to vegan restaurants looking for indulgence, looking for comfort. And of course, it takes a lot of convincing, you know, like, I mean, there are a lot of people who don't want to go to a vegan restaurant because they think they're going to get a bowl of lentils. But as we've seen time and time again, like, vegan burgers are phenomenal. Vegan quote unquote chicken is phenomenal. Vegan pizza is phenomenal. Vegan chocolate, vegan ice cream. Like, you can be the most indulgent person in the world and never touch an animal product.
Yeah, it is a new world. There's so many choices. I remember when Angelica's Kitchen closed and there were articles in the New York Times, everybody was trying to, weigh in on why this happened. And one of the articles was saying that people just weren't looking for the brown rice and beans anymore, even though I think there's certainly a group within the vegan world, the whole food plant-based people, that's the food.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's, if I'm being honest, 99.9% of the time, that's how I eat. You know, I eat brown rice with tempeh and broccoli. But one thing I learned when I owned Little Pine was even the healthiest person on the planet wants to indulge when they go out to dinner. You know, they want to go out and they want to have a night of sort of hedonism and indulgence, even if the next day they're going to eat brown rice and tempeh.
yeah, and you have some beautiful, beautiful recipes that cover all the bases. I always like to make one recipe out of any cookbook that I feature on the show. And if there's mac and cheese in there, that's what I do. And oh, you've got a dandy mac and cheese. So I just want to just say to the listeners, we've got holidays coming up. Maybe you want to give somebody a cookbook, give them this one, especially the non-vegans. Here's the rationale. It's like, oh my God, I can tell this is a book and she's a vegan. It's going to be one of those vegan books. But then they're going to see it's Moby and they like Moby. And so they're going to open the book and they're going to cook the food. And every vegan meal is one vegan meal to the good. So by all means, check that out, the Little Pine Cookbook. And we will put links in the show notes at mainstreetvegan.net. So Moby, talk to me about the celebrity thing. I was thinking about the restaurant and having far memories. When I was a teenager, I was kind of ace girl reporter. I had a press card for a teen magazine, and I got into my first Beatles press conference when I was 14. And through all those connections, I got the silent number to a restaurant on the King's Road in London. It was called Alvaro's. And you had to have the silent number or you couldn't go. And there was just something magical about going in there and kind of being lifted up by that aura of celebrity. Well, you've lived in that world for most of your life now, and I have a feeling you have a really interesting take on it. So talk to those of us who don't live there.
Well, I mean, and I apologize for stating the obvious, but we live in a culture that is obsessed with celebrity. One could say it's a culture that's driven by celebrity, and I don't say that as a good thing. It's just a sort of a simple statement of empirical fact. And we could talk for hours about how complicated the world of celebrity is and how celebrities feel like they use their status to somehow exempt themselves from the human condition, or the idea that people have that celebrity makes them more special somehow. None of that's true. The human condition affects everyone. It catches up with everyone eventually. And celebrities are no more interesting or smarter or funnier or better than non-celebrities. But somehow, some of us stumble into the world of celebrity. And I've been doing this for quite a long time. And so in that time, I've expected fame and celebrity to fix my issues. I've expected it to provide unending happiness and contentedness, and then been very sad to find out, like, oh, it doesn't fix issues and it doesn't provide unending happiness and contentedness. So now the reason I'm grateful for fame for a few reasons. One is that if we live in a culture that's obsessed with fame, I'm glad that I've experienced it. Largely so I can dismiss it. I know its shortcomings. And it's hard to know those shortcomings until you've sort of been on the inside looking, expecting fame to do more than it was designed for. I'm also grateful that I have an audience for the work that I do, but mostly, first and foremost, my life's work is animal rights, working on behalf of animal rights. And for me, the only good use of fame is to promote animal rights. Like I post on social media quite a lot. And honestly, it was up to me. I would never post about myself. I would only post about animal rights. But every now and then I remember like, oh, there are people here who are interested in me. So I sort of every now and then have to throw up a picture of myself. But, my goal in being famous and using fame is to just try and help create a world where animals are not used by and for humans.
And sometimes people say, oh, I wish celebrities wouldn't say they're vegan until they're absolutely certain, because we lose a lot when somebody leaves. What do you think?
Yeah, I try very hard to live a non-judgmental life, but if I'm being honest, when I find out that someone has, renounced their veganism or is calling themselves vegan but eating fish or something, I'm like, yeah, if I'm being honest, I judge them, and it makes me incredibly sad. But it's also tricky. It's like, how do you navigate animal rights driven veganism in this world? Because the truth is, as an animal rights driven vegan, I look at most people and I just don't understand. I'm like, because really eating meat, eating dairy, it's sociopathic, if not psychopathic. Like people are engaging in a process that they know kills animals. And the first test for a psychopath is, do you hurt animals? Talk to an FBI profiler, and like, if they're trying to figure out whether someone's a psychopath, if they've hurt animals, they're a psychopath. But 99% of the people on the planet actively hurt animals. How do we make sense of that? How do we make sense of people engaging in a process that's destroying the climate, that's destroying the rainforest, that's killing them, that's, destroying their hearts, they're giving them cancer, diabetes, obesity? Like, how do we make sense of it? It's really, it's quite a massive challenge applied to celebrities, but also just applied to humans in general.
That's such a tough one, because tolerance is a really positive word, and nobody wants to feel like they're bigoted or like they're in a corner and they're not going to allow for other input. But whenever lives are at stake, I know I was talking about this with Brian Graff from the North American Vegan Society long ago, and he said it has to do with critical mass, that when you get to critical mass about even some social issues that we've seen lately, certain things used to be considered okay, and now we know they never were okay, and they're absolutely not okay now. We get it, and we're just not there, I guess, yet with the numbers with animal rights. I don't know how to make it faster.
We do everything that we can. And I'm all in favor of tolerance if it leads to a vegan world. Like, I have no interest in tolerance if it means tolerating people's bad behavior, not expecting them to change. Like, I'm not one of these sort of I'm a live and let live person, but in its most literal sense. Like, if someone's not letting an animal live, if they're contributing to the suffering and death of an animal, I'm sorry, but like, I can't tolerate that.
Yeah, I totally get it. And I don't understand what in your opinion, why is it that you got it at an early age, as did I? Simone Reyes, who was just in our first segment, got it, continues to get it. And other people very often don't. What's missing?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I wish I had a really honest, succinct, insightful answer, except I think it's almost like the equivalent of death by 1,000 cuts. It's a lot of different variables. Like, you factor in family, you factor in culture, you factor in the fact that the average IQ in the United States is 98. You factor in people's unwillingness to change. You factor in big business and lobbyists, and you factor in government subsidized marketing. Like it's, you know, the world of meat and dairy is supported just about everywhere. And once we leave it, once we take the red pill, the vegan red pill, as it were, you wonder how anyone with a conscience can be involved in a process that destroys animals and the only home we have and people's health. But when you're in it, because I was in it for the first 19 years of my life, I was just, you know, eating pepperoni pizza and hamburgers, and I thought it was perfectly fine. There is that assumption that people make that if it's socially sanctioned and historically sanctioned, that it has to be okay. You know, that's how slavery was justified for the longest time. That's how women being, you know, denied the right to vote for the longest time. That's why same-sex couples being denied the right to get married for the longest time. Like people sort of thought like, oh, because these things have been around for a while, they're probably okay. And it's so important to stand up and say, oh no, slavery was an abomination. Women being denied the right to vote was an abomination. Same-sex couples being denied the right to get married, that's an abomination. Using animals for food is an abomination.
Does anybody ever say to you, you have so much power in the world to influence others? Why animals? Why not make sure all the people are taken care of first?
Oh, the best thing you could do for humanity, as you know, I mean, I sort of feel like I understand the subtext of your question, or I hope I do, which is really the best thing you could ever do for humans is get them to go vegan. You know, whatever issue we care about is incredibly well served by veganism. You know, if it's issues of food deserts, go vegan. Stop subsidizing foods that make people sick. If it's climate, environment, antibiotic resistance, Alzheimer's, education, pandemics, all these issues have veganism at their core. And so you could very, very easily argue that the best thing you could do for anyone who wants to save humanity, go vegan.
I completely agree with you. Now I want to ask you a verbal question. The word, the V word, I love it because people know what it means. And so many people say it holds us back.
I think it's context. Depends where you are. Like when I owned Little Pine, we called Little Pine a vegan restaurant because we're in Silver Lake. You know, Silver Lake is this super, you know, like hip, progressive, aware. I mean, like, of course, every place has its shortcomings, but Silver Lake was a place where you could use the word vegan and there's no stigma. If you're opening a restaurant in Tulsa, Oklahoma, vegan is probably not the best way to go. You know, then you pick a nice, pretty font and you call it plant-based. I personally stay away from the word plant-based because I live in Los Angeles and I'm surrounded by vegans. Like there's no reason for me to use the word plant-based. If I had to move to Des Moines, Iowa, maybe then I'd start calling myself plant-based and open a plant-based restaurant because, again, it's cultural context.
You really do want to save the animals because you would even open another restaurant if
Oh, I'd
indeed
do
you moved to
anything.
Des
I mean,
Moines.
like there is nothing in my life, including my life, more important to me than working on behalf of animal rights.
And tell us why that is in our last 2 minutes.
For all the obvious reasons. I mean, I start with the worldly reasons of like reducing climate change, saving the rainforest, ending antibiotic resistance, preventing pandemics, you know, protecting human health, protecting workers. But first and foremost is my core unshakable belief that every individual on the planet, be they human or not, is entitled to the life that they've been given. You know, that everybody's entitled to their own rights, their own will. And especially, I would say that especially applies to the defenseless and the innocent, you know, and animals are defenseless and innocent. And how we treat the defenseless and the vulnerable and the innocent tells us everything about who we are.
That's a lot. I feel like I would love to do a moment of silence, but I guess that doesn't work very well on the radio. So the book is The Little Pine Cookbook, Modern Plant-Based Comfort. And you know, you get quite a bit of comfort, I think, just from doing these things that Moby is talking about and leading with your heart. So you can find our wonderful guest, Moby.com. He's Moby on Instagram. And guess what? We still have a minute left. So preach to
Oh,
us.
one thing I would say is, for me personally, I will never, ever try and make money from veganism. So like the Little Pine Cookbook, when I owned Little Pine, the restaurant, the idea is promoting veganism, promote animal rights, but also to, if revenue is generated, the revenue goes to vegan projects or 501c3s. So just to be clear, I respect other people and their approach to, like, pay the rent with their activism. But for me, my conscience prevents me from ever making money from activism.
That's beautiful. So buy the book, support the cause. Is that how it works?
I mean, there are a lot of other intermediaries. There's a publishing
Oh,
company,
yes, of
there,
course.
lots of other things. So give the money directly to animal rights organizations. But if money is filtered through to me, I certainly would not in good conscience ever keep it.
Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful way to live. Moby, bless your heart. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for listening today. Thanks to Unity Online Radio and to all our listeners. God bless you. Eat your veggies.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. All the best.